Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. So, whatever happened to Bambi Woods? Welcome back to this, our second installment on the adult film classic Debbie Does Dallas. And just like any other discussion about the film Debbie Does Dallas, there's only one place to start, and that is with the late, great comedian Norm MacDonald. Fans of Norm will remember his now infamous appearance on the Late Night Show with Conan O'Brien on May 15th, 1997. The guests that night were him and Courtney Thorne-Smith of Melrose Place fame. She was promoting her new film, Chairman of the Board, which also happened to star Carrot Top. And Norm starts in with some gentle ribbing at Carrot Top's expense, the apex of which is pure late-night comedy magic after Norm learns the name of the movie and takes one of the greatest zingers of all time at Carrot Top's expense. If you know, then you know. But if you don't, then there's a link in the show notes and you should really go treat yourself and give it a watch. Now, in Mr. Top's defense, he seems to have taken it in stride. After Norm passed away last year, Carrot Top had this to say at his show in Las Vegas. Quote, "The thing he did on Conan O'Brien is just fucking great. For you. Here we go." End quote. And then he played a clip for the audience. Norm would go on to say of the incident when he was asked while promoting his book about it that, quote, "When I did it, there were no computers, and so I did not know that it lived on forever. Back then, you would just say things. People in the general vicinity would hear them and then forget them. But now, I really have to make that phone call to Carrot Top." And Norm brings up a fairly decent point. As of the recording of this episode, that infamous interview he did with Conan and Courtney Thorne-Smith was 24 years ago. It's not like the morning papers were all abuzz about Norm MacDonald and his jokes about Carrot Top. It wouldn't really be talked about until years and years later when someone put a clip of it on YouTube. And then, almost like a cult classic, the notoriety of the clip snowballed through the years. You know, I'm 38 years old. I grew up pre-internet, or at least pre-internet explosion. And with as much as it's integrated into our lives, I kind of forget sometimes that it hasn't always been there. And then I think about my parents. Now, I have an interest in media, and I know about the rise of VHS and the battle with Betamax and all that. And I know the general time frame all of that went down. And still, I never put it together until embarrassingly recently that meant my parents, who are both still alive, grew up with no way to watch movies at home unless it was played on TV. You saw a movie in the theater, and that was it. So I know what you're thinking. Am I saying Norm MacDonald was in Debbie Does Dallas? Well, dear listeners, friends, if I may be so bold, no, and quite frankly, that's a really weird place to take it. What I am saying is, shit is different now. And with that being said, it's time for this week's trigger warnings. We will be talking about drug abuse. So, as I'm sure the class will remember, Debbie Benton, the titular Debbie of Debbie Does Dallas, was played by the incomparable and brand new to the scene Bambi Woods. In fact, Debbie Does Dallas was her first role, having been turned on to the idea by a friend of hers whom she owed money to. Now, keeping it tasteful, a thing I do on rare occasions, Bambi's performance as Debbie is certainly worthy of praise. Within moments of her breaking onto the screen, she has an immutable charm and so quickly and fully embodies the character of the girl next door. She just had this presence that I don't think can be taught. And what a place to start your porn career, as the star of one of the biggest well-known porno films of all time. Bambi's career was set to go off like a rocket. Or a boner, I guess. But, as the story goes, after Debbie Does Dallas, Bambi disappeared forever, all signs pointing to her life having been devoured by the dark world that is the adult entertainment industry, and dying tragically of a drug overdose in 1986. The mystery she leaves in her wake, we can only assume, was fraught with dread and misery. I mean, or not. It should be noted that it was well known that Bambi Woods had a drug habit. And I am no expert on the inner runnings of the adult industry, but I do think to claim porn has had a stellar record with recognizing and combating drug use within its ranks would be less than accurate. Sadly, this was documented playing out with one of the other stars of Debbie Does Dallas. Arcadia Lake, who played Tammy in the movie, was suggested for the project by fellow actor, then lover, and soon-to-be husband, Eric Edwards, whose real name is Rob Everett. Rob had been working in the adult film industry already when he met Arcadia, real name Michelle N. Carpenter, but nicknamed the Backdoor Brunette, in 1977. She was dancing for Show World, a sex emporium in Times Square. As a side note, I do not get to say the word sex emporium nearly as much as I should. According to legendary porn star Ron Jeremy, before that, she was a college aerobics teacher. But not much is known about her past other than that she was born out of wedlock to a single mother. But such is the case so many times when it comes to gathering information before the age of information that was brought on by the internet. Sadly, somewhere along the way, Arcadia picked up a nasty heroin habit, as heroin habits tend to be. To her credit, she did seek treatment and began a methadone program. Eventually, she wanted to leave the program and go completely straight. A difficult task, to be sure. The clinic that Arcadia was at roundly rejected the idea of easing her off the methadone. So Arcadia and Rob both took a year off the industry so they could work through her going cold turkey together. And it worked. She came out the other side clean. But sadly, like what happens all too often with addiction, it didn't last. She fell back into it through a stranger, and she would pass away of a drug overdose about 10 years later on September 13th, 1991, at the age of 34. Rob Everett would end up hearing of her passing at an award show where he was set to receive his Lifetime Achievement Award. For his part, Rob is still around and kicking and still in the porno biz, but he has given up acting and is now mainly an editor. A decision, he says, he made for his kids, not wanting them to be ridiculed for what their daddy does for a living. Though it is worth noting that he never hid his previous life as an adult film star from them, being very open about what he did and even leaving his awards hanging in his house, including his Lifetime Achievement Award. And then there was Rob's on-screen wife, the Mrs. Hardwick to his Mr. Hardwick, Robin Cohen, or as she soon came to be known, Robin Bird. Robin Bird is not only still alive, but she is thriving and has been since the release of Debbie Does Dallas. After guest hosting a public access show called Hot Legs in 1977, she took over the show and changed the name to The Robin Bird Show. She created a talk show format where she would interview other porn stars and strippers, both male and female. The show would end with the guests dancing and stripping all the way down to full nudity. This was a practice that the cable company that they leased the airtime from for the show, Manhattan Cable Company, or the company that would eventually buy them out, Time Warner Cable, were none too fond of. But, fun fact, cable companies don't provide space on their service out of the goodness of their hearts or even for money. See, our good old friends over at the FCC have for quite some time mandated that cable operators provide airtime for independent cable programmers. This is slightly different than public educational and government access, known as PEG, in that leased access has to pay a fee determined by a formula, and public access is generally free or very cheap. So Time Warner, apparently terrified of the idea of a world where people had free access to boobs and butts at 1 o'clock in the morning, would not let this moral indignation stand. They wanted to scramble the show, only unscrambling it for viewers who had written a letter asking the cable company to have the show unscrambled. Quick side note for my younger dearest listeners, friends, if I in fact may be so bold, you may have picked up on a motif, if you will, for this episode of the world before the internet. See, before the wide world of adult entertainment was available to you via the magic slab of glass we hold in our pockets and kind of ridiculously still refer to as phones, one of the main sources of getting adult material was watching late night pay channels that were, well, scrambled and hope that you could make out a titty. The image would be so distorted and different colored and rolling as to be completely useless to anyone. That is, to anyone except desperate preteens looking for their first taste of nudity. Robin Bird, and notably pornographer Al Goldstein, the man credited with normalizing hardcore pornography, were in a long-standing legal battle over the scrambling issue, seeing victory in both 1978 and 1995. The Robin Bird Show still plays today, unscrambled and uncut, though it does have a warning before it. Outside of her legal fights, she has been and continues to be an outspoken advocate for the LGBTQIA community, herself identifying as bi, and also being very outspoken for the practice of safe sex and AIDS awareness. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear their signature black crochet bikini. And then there is none other than Mr. Greenfield himself, Richard Bolla, aka Robert Kerman, the man who kicked off this two-part series. As you know, if you listen to episode 4 of this humble podcast, Roger Kerman would go on to star in quite a number of Italian horror films, including Mangiati Vivi, Cannibal Ferox, and most notoriously Cannibal Holocaust, where he delivers an excellent performance as Dr. Harold Monroe. Though during this time, he was never fully able to break out of pornography. He was able to gain an agent and start getting bit parts in more mainstream movie and TV shows. But after they found out about his past in adult films, they dropped him. Kerman would say of his time in pornography that he regretted it, stating that, quote, "I probably ruined the best years of my life as an actor," end quote. Being essentially blacklisted from entering the mainstream took its toll on Kerman. He would battle bouts of depression and substance abuse for years. He would eventually begin to make a living touring on the horror convention circuit until he sadly passed away of complications with diabetes on December 27th, 2018. Oh, and then there was the mob. How did I forget about the mob? Well, maybe more specifically, the FBI. Now, remember part 1 of this episode? Debbie Does Dallas was financed by one Mickey Zeffirano, porn czar of the Bonanno crime family. Well, as it turns out, at the time, Mickey, coolest job title in the world Zeffirano, was under the watchful eye of the United States of America's Federal Bureau of Investigations. Oh, but this wasn't your typical FBI operation. The poorly named Operation Me Porn, short for Miami Pornography, was the first time in U.S. history that agents were allowed to go undercover into the porn industry. Now, keep in mind, with the financial explosion of films like Deep Throat, deeply artistic films like Behind the Green Door and The Opening of Misty Beethoven, and critical darlings like The Devil and Miss Jones, adult film was in an absolutely precarious place in the late 1970s. It was beginning to knock on the door of mainstream acceptance, while at the very same time still operating in a very legally gray area that, to put it mildly, created an atmosphere in the financing department of these films that was more than a little hospitable to money from less than reputable sources. To start separating the art and the product from the illegal aspects of the commerce, the FBI was going to need somebody with a surgical precision. Or, they could just go with a guy that had this to say about pornography. Quote, "Everybody is a victim of pornography. You are, because of your age and exposure to it. I certainly am. The actors and actresses are fringe-type characters, got poor moral values, or they wouldn't be in this sort of thing. And they are just in it for the thrills and the money and the drugs." End quote. That man, who so boldly listed money as a bad reason to do a job, was FBI agent Bill Kelly, head of the whole me porn operation. An operation that on Valentine's Day in 1980 would result in around 400 warrants being issued and 45 to 65 arrests being made. One of those warrants was for none other than Mickey Zaffarano. The cops came looking for Zaffarano at one of his businesses. Unbeknownst to them, he had a secret passageway out to another one of his business. Unfortunately for him, cops were also at that business as well. Zaffarano would die of a heart attack trying to avoid police by shuffling back and forth between his two businesses. Fun fact, a few years later, in 1986, the Attorney General would publish the Meese Report, which was a comprehensive investigation of pornography ordered by Ronald Reagan. In there is dialogue and graphic depictions of scenes from Debbie Does Dallas. Some folks have ventured to guess that this may have contributed to the Meese Reports being a bestseller. So, here's the question of the day. Whatever happened to Bambi? There are stories afloat. The most common being she died of a drug overdose. Some say she got mixed in with the mob, or that her parents came and saved her from the drugs or the industry. The truth is, we'll never really know what happened to the starlet that burned so bright and then disappeared. That can be a frustrating answer in this, our glorious age of information. But I submit to you, friends, my best guess. And I think it's the solution that holds the most water if you're willing to think of her life as a life and not a narrative, and are able to drop the true crime, low forbidding hum from your mind. I want to mention real quick that I am in fact a fan of true crime, and that was in no way a dig. Is probably still alive. If she's not, then it would have been natural causes that took her out. See, here's the thing about Bambi Woods. Her real name is not really known. Sure, there may be a couple of people who know it, but there have been a handful of private investigators hired to try to find out, but none have come back with anything conclusive. One of the investigators has said that her real name was Barbara Woodson, but I feel like that would be akin to me choosing a fake name like Ron Blersenbach to try and throw people off the scent of who I really was. If she had died back in '86, someone would have had to know her real name to make the connection. Look, I'm not shy about my position that sex work is real work, but also I feel it important to say that sex workers are real people as well. A sentiment that I hope goes without saying. We've yet to reach a point in society where we've been overly kind to sex workers, women especially. So there can be a tendency to say, oh, the porn star died of a drug overdose? That makes sense. Sadly, that was the fate that befell Arcadia Lake, after all. But that's not what happened to Robin Bird. Quite the opposite. And the truth is, most of the women in Debbie Does Dallas ended up just quietly leaving the industry. And that's where I'll put my money on when it comes to Bambi Woods. A young woman did this little porno flick to pay off some debts. It ballooned into one of the biggest adult films right in front of her face. And not wanting to be nationally known as a porn star, she quietly left the industry at a time when she was lucky enough for that to be a possibility. I mean, I hope with some money in her pocket and having enjoyed her time in the industry, but that would just be me wanting to put my narrative on her. The point is, I think we can all do to treat our friends in the sex industry a little nicer. If not that, at least with basic human dignity. And Miss Woods, Bambi, if I may be so bold, if by some weird chance you are listening, I sincerely hope you're doing well. And thanks for Debbie. She would have never been the same without you. Also, final fun fact. I'll miss you, friends. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the Band Media Podcast. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios. Dear listeners, adios.